News Radio 600 Kogo, San Diego Business Saturday. Sully here. Great to have you along. Big show today. Coming up later in the program, Bob Babbitt, the founder of Competitor Magazine, the Competitor Group, and of course the Challenge Athletes Foundation, among other things. The host of Babbittville. He'll be joining us later in the program today. Also, Steve Weisman, the Scam Man, will be with us. He runs a website called scamicide.com. Has written about 12 books about scams and identity theft. You'll want to check that out. And also, Christina Gustin, wealth advisor with UBS here in San Diego. It's all coming up on San Diego Business Saturday. All right, so let's get it started. We had a really great week on Wall Street this week. The Dow Jones, the NASDAQ, and the S&P all advancing nicely. In fact, if you take a look at all the charts, including some San Diego companies, it was sort of an interesting week, considering still there's a lot of noise happening in Washington. Dow Jones ends the week up right close to the 26,000 range, and using a stair-step pattern. And that's a technical term that you use when you're looking at a chart of the Dow, the NASDAQ, or the S&P, where it's really one step forward, half a step back, one step forward, half a step back, and it's a really clean and healthy way to trade. Same thing happening with the NASDAQ composite. The NASDAQ's been really strong on the strength of Microsoft, as well as Apple, the QQQQ, which we'll talk about later. That's the NASDAQ 100 exchange-traded fund. S&P is going to mirror the Dow Jones, also closing around 2,800 today. Big scandal this week that you heard about, the scandal regarding the college admissions scam. I earned my admission to UCSD, SUSD. Yes, I did all three colleges the old-fashioned way. I had a good SAT. I did pretty solid extracurricular activities, and I cheated off the guy in chemistry next to me, like we all did back in the 70s. I kid, of course, but the story, obviously, everyone's interested in because people hate line cutters. And it brings up the ever-present conversation when speaking about college and universities, and that is how expensive is tuition. And I can tell you one of the reasons tuitions are so high is because there's no incentive to lower tuition. The virtue symbol in this country used to be to get a BA, get a bachelor's degree. Now it seems like that's almost, oh, by the way, you need a master's degree. So it's interesting because you sort of have to ask yourself, is it really worth going through this part-time job that you go through as a parent or even as a student when you're a sophomore or a junior in high school? Because it really is a part-time job getting into college. It is a veritable quest for a college education and a good life beyond. At least that's what the data says. But you do have to ask yourself the question, is it worth it? Is it worth the $1.4 trillion in student loans that now represent the second largest pile of total household debt, topped only by our mortgages? So if you're a parent hoping to provide your kid with a more bountiful life, this should be a warning to you. Look, you can't deny the Economic Policy Institute's findings that say that college graduates earn 98% more per hour than non-college graduates. But we're going into a different time now. We're going to the gig economy. We're going into a technology play. We don't know that this is going to be the case for very much longer. So I asked Christina Gustin, our wealth advisor, to talk a little bit about this. And what I want to talk about is the fact that if you still want to go to college, you shouldn't go broke doing so. Christina, thanks so much for swinging by today, because I know this story's been top of mind, and you must have had a number of parents call you this week that have California 529A plans asking about if if it's a waste of time or not. Great to have you today. First of all, do you have a comment on the story? Is UBS putting out any advisories, or you guys just keep your head down and do the normal?
Well, thanks for having me. I don't think UBS has an official comment on the story, but I would say that, it's one of my favorite things when people ask me, what do I really need a financial advisor for? Can't I just buy some index funds at E-Trade and kind of let it ride? And the answer is that, what we do now is so much more than that. And if our relationship with a client and a family is based around the idea of financial planning, one of the key pieces to that, if there are children as a part of your scenario, is how are we going to pay for college? So that's something we talk a lot about, and the 529 plan that you mentioned is one of my favorite vehicles.
Let's talk about the 529 plan for a minute. The 529 plan is a tax advantage investment vehicle. It's in the U.S. It's designed to encourage you to save for future higher education for a designee, typically your son or daughter. How does it work specifically? Talk about the mechanics of it.
Yeah, so back in, I think it was 1996, IRS Section 529 said that if you set money aside in one of these plans, and there are a number of different programs across all the different states in the U.S., the savings, when applied to qualified college expenses, post-secondary education, the money comes out tax-free. So the power of that is hard to understate. It's incredible, and especially when we start out, hopefully early in the child's life. Often, as soon as a child or grandchild is born, that's what we're talking to the family about. Those savings over 18 years with a compound growth, all of that money comes out with no tax consequences as long as it's used for college expenses.
So Christina's been a longtime guest on the Big Biz Show, where you can find us weekdays, Rusty Nails and I. And of course, she herself has appeared on several local television and radio programs as well as national. One of the things I learned from you a long time ago when you were on the air with us is if you want to go to college, don't go broke doing so, and downplay the prestige. You have to insist on a college that you and your student can afford. You want to address that conversation? Because I know you've got a lot of folks that say, I got to have my kid at Harvard or Yale or USC, but sometimes it's just not in the cards, right?
So Frank Bruni with the New York Times wrote a great book that I recommend to everyone who says that to me, and it's called Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be. And he addresses this mania that we have for brand name college education in the U.S., which in my opinion is completely out of control right now. And I think it's much more important to find a school that suits your child and their aptitudes. And that's, there are a lot of great college counselors out there in high schools and operating independently that can help you through that process. But what you said is so important about how do we pay for this, okay? So when we're doing financial planning, we generally use an inflation rate of around 2% for the economy. It's really important to understand that tuition costs are inflating between 5 and 8% right now, so much faster than the actual economy. So I think that planning and savings, the idea of planning for college in our country has not kept up with the way the expenses are going up, and people are taking on much more. For someone to graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt is inconceivable to me on so many levels. And really, if we start early, I can run a projection for someone that says, your kid is 3 months old right now. We open a 529 plan. You tell me you want to send them to Stanford, UCSD, wherever you want to go. I can project for you in 18 years how much that's going to cost you and how much you need to save on a monthly basis to get you there.
So what's interesting here is that we just talked about the $1.4 trillion in student debt here. And one of the things you mentioned is a big reason is because college tuitions are going up 5 to 8% per year. There really is no incentive for universities in this country to lower their tuition because the supply and demand, the strict supply and demand, dictates that, well, not only is it tough to get into, but it's going to be more expensive. So if you get back to the notion of downplaying the prestige and staying local, over the past 40 years in state public college costs, if you're thinking 30% to 45% less than a private school, that's a conversation you have to have. The other piece of this thing is that you've got to sort of look at the local community college first. Do you ever talk about maybe 2 years of the community college followed by the 2 years of a major university?
Definitely. I think for people that don't have enough saved up for a 4-year college education, that's a very realistic option. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that a lot of these dream schools that they have are much easier to get into as a junior transfer than they are as a freshman, because all these colleges are reporting their freshman admission statistics. That's what everyone's focusing on. They're not as focused on junior transfers coming. It's much, much easier. And when you get the degree, everyone only cares what it says on the diploma, not where you did your first 2 years.
Christina Gustin is a account vice president. She's a wealth advisor. She's a portfolio manager at RKG Wealth Management, part of UBS Financial Services here in San Diego. I have to ask you, because I've read before, and of course, thankfully, both of my girls are out of college now, and that is the gift that did not keep on giving, luckily, because I saved early and often for that. But I remember only saving a few $100 a month way back when they were little. Is that still a possibility if you get involved when your kids are very young to save enough money for college? Because I think our college expenses for 4 years turned out to be about $120,000 per kid. I think that's obviously going to be optimistic to think that's going to stay that way for the next 20 years. But is there sort of a ballpark that people need to be thinking about, or is it really individual?
It's really individual because, there's just such a huge range in tuition expenses. I think USC is now one of the most expensive schools in the nation. I think at like $65,000 a year, and I'm not even sure if that includes room and board. Versus, you look locally, you can get great value from San Diego State. The UC schools have some of the best value educations in the nation right now. So there's a huge range there, but I have a lot of people that automate their savings, couple $100 a month every month. You start when the kid is young, and you're going to have a good chunk of change when it's time for them to go to school.
Christina, when people are saving for retirement and saving for college, is that two different piles of money, or do you put it all in one and then slice one off when the time comes?
Definitely two different piles of money. Again, because with the 529, you get that huge tax advantage of taking the money out tax-free. Retirement savings inside a qualified retirement vehicle are tax-deferred, but tax-free for college expenses is an even bigger tax advantage. So definitely separate.
Christina, as always, thank you so much for your wisdom and your time. Christina Gustin, Wealth Advisor, Portfolio Manager, RKG Wealth Management, right here at UBS Financial here in San Diego. One of the smartest people I think I've ever met. Definitely the smartest person on this radio program, I can tell you that. And my name is Sully. It is San Diego Business Saturday. You can catch me here every Wednesday with Ted and LaDonna, by the way, at 8:10, talking all things business, also on KUSI. There is a scam that is headed your way that you may or may not have been a part of, trying to get your money. Steve Weisman, the scam man, is going to come tell us about that. Scamicide.com. But first, here's some traffic. News Radio 600 Kogo. Gosh, finally a beautiful weekend. San Diego Business Saturday. News Radio 600 Kogo. Great to have you along today. I'm Sully. Boy, we have a great show coming up. Just a few minutes, Bob Babbitt, the founder of the Challenge Athletes Foundation and the Competitor Group, will be joining me right here in studio at the Jump Television Studios. In the meantime, Dow Jones, NASDAQ, S&P all having a great week this week, and I'll put those charts up at kogo.com, keyword Sully. In fact, if you want to watch the TV version of this program, if you can't get enough of me just driving around your cars on a Saturday morning, you can go to kogo.com, keyword Sully. You can actually watch the guests as they're on the air and on the set with me. Of course, our next guest, Steve Weisman, is out of Boston, but he is the author of so many books on scams. He's been a regular on the Big Biz Show for, I'm going to say, roughly 12 years now. Steve is a recognized expert in scams, identity theft, cybersecurity. He's also a lawyer. He's a college professor. He's a prolific author, and he's one of the smartest guys I know. He started a website, and he always says that myself and Rusty Nails had a part in this. I'm not sure if that's true, but it's scamicide.com, where you can find the scam of the day every day. And I can tell you right now that my parents, as well as my kids, look at this thing regularly. And I can tell you, they have, because of this website, it has saved all of us a ton of money, and there's some pretty easy stuff to keep track of. Steve's also been a guest here on News Radio 600 Kogo in the past, but it's great to have him here for Saturday morning. Steve, how are you? Great to see you today from Boston.
Terrific. How you doing?
Good. So I got to ask you, first of all, for the people that haven't heard you in San Diego, can you talk about a little bit how you got into this? Because your first book that you had on with us, and I got to say it was 12 years ago, was The Truth About Avoiding Scams. Talk about how this became part of your curriculum, so to speak.
Well, it's a kind of a combination, and actually it is part of my curriculum. I started a course at Bentley University in white-collar crime. It's actually the most popular class on campus. I was a victim of identity theft, and I was curious about how, in those days, it was the early days of identity theft, how that happened and how that worked. Also, before I taught at Bentley University, I taught in the Massachusetts state prison system. And so I met a lot of the old scammers and con men. It was great.
Which is where you learn the scams, right?
It was, these guys would decry it because they're saying, back when they did it, it took some skill, and now any kid with a computer can do it. Well, and to a certain extent, they're right.
It's interesting because this is, in this day and age, typically somebody's not going to walk up you on the street with a gun and rob you. They're typically going to walk up and or send an email to you or something like that and do it electronically. It's really interesting because you're seeing it happen as the guy's coming at you. You know it's a scam. This guy's trying to take your money, and of course I'm talking about things like the Ethiopian letter scam, or my parents calling saying, hey, are you really stuck in another country, and did you really need me to wire you $2,000? It's those type of things. It's a completely different world. It's a new frontier, and it changes every day, right?
It does, and it's interesting too, because a lot of these scams are old scams that have been updated to new technology. And you talk about someone, coming up to you with a gun, not so much anymore. Actually, the street crime statistics in Tampa, Florida, have gone down in recent years, and the gangs have gone into income tax identity theft. These kinds of crimes, they are profitable, they're easy to get away with, and yet they don't carry some of the real risks that other kinds of crimes did happen. But yeah, the investment scams, we look at so many of these and say, how could people fall for them? But a lot of very intelligent people fall for these scam artists, the only criminals we call artists, who have a knowledge of psychology that Freud would have envied.
What's interesting is I look at some of the books. By the way, Steve J.J. Weisman is who we call the Scam Man. He's got his website, scamicide.com. But some of the book titles, Steve, Identity Theft Alert, which is your most recent book, The Truth About Avoiding Scams, which is the first book I met you on. Yeah. But then you also have 50 Ways to Protect Your Identity. You also have How to Avoid Being Scammed, The Truth About Identity Theft. You've got The Truth About Employment Scams, The Truth About Telephone Scams, The Truth About Tax Scams. Boy, I'll tell you, there's a new one every day, and I want to point out a section of this website, scamicide.com, where it says under the tab Scams, you can look at what's called Scam of the Day. And we'll get into some of those in a moment. But talk about some of the things that we see that just don't seem to go away. I bring up that Ethiopian letter scam. Why don't you tell folks what that is, first of all, and how that thing keeps on resurfacing? Aren't we smart enough to know that there isn't a dignitary that escaped a country that has $15 million there, and if I would just send them $3,000 wire fees, they're going to split the money with me? At this point, aren't we smart enough to realize that isn't accurate?
Well, it's the thinning of the herd, and one of the more interesting aspects of this, and this scam goes back to the 1500s when it was called the Spanish prisoner scam. But lately, as you're kind of indicating, they become more and more ridiculous and outrageous, and that actually is on purpose, because what the scammers are doing is they don't want to waste their time on someone who may be asking them a lot of questions. They want to get that low-hanging fruit. They want to get the people that are desperate for money and want to believe that this is somehow legitimate. And so they send something particularly outrageous, because the people who are going to respond to that, and it only has to be a small number of people because they're using the computers to connect with them, they'll be easy pickings. So yeah, those are, those kind of scams, as opposed to SIMS card porting. This is going to be the new hot thing. And this is a way that, potentially your bank account, you're using dual factor authentication. So a code is sent to your phone. Even if someone has your password, they're not going to be able to access your bank account online. Well, guess what? The scammer has managed to go into your mobile phone carrier, get them to change the SIM card, that's the intelligence in your card, to their phone. So when the code is sent, it's sent to their phone, they get the code, they've already stolen your password, and they're into your bank account. We're just starting to see.
So we're just handing this stuff over to them. By the way, you talked about low-hanging fruit, Steve. I got to believe the low-hanging fruit has got to be the elder financial abuse. Now, of course, I think there's got to be two pools, and I've got a little bit of an unfair advantage from interviewing you in the past, though. But if you think in terms of what's going on in scams, you have to think that young college kids, teenagers, and the elderly are the most likely, and specifically the elderly, because, of course, they have the dough. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the head, Sully, because how it works is millennials and the younger people, they actually are scammed at a slightly higher level than the elderly, who come in number two. However, the elderly have more money, and they get hit for bigger hits, more money when they are scammed. And, with seniors, there actually is a physiological reason for it. There's been some studies at Cornell University recently showing there's a part of our brain that deals with skepticism and being able to recognize when we are being scammed that becomes less viable as we age. And so, yeah, there are The elderly are often specifically targeted both here in the United States, around the world, and people, the Jamaican lottery scam. A lottery scam hits everyone, but they particularly go after phone lists of seniors, which they can get easily enough. And they've taken a lot of money out of unsuspecting seniors with this scam.
Hey, Steve, let's talk a little bit about the rules. And one of your rules is that if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And things aren't as bad as you think. They're probably worse. With respect to a few things that my kids have learned and my parents have learned, is usually the first thing I look for if I see an email that I'm just scratching my head about is bad grammar. Talk about that, because that's one of the number one things that you spot when you see a scam email coming your way.
Yeah, because the technology is there around the world, and cybercrime is a huge issue in a lot of countries where English is not the primary language. So you may have something that carries the logo of a company, it looks good, however, the grammar's off. And we've seen this time and time again. This is a good indication. You look at where's the email address from which it's being sent, but you also do look for telltale signs like poor grammar, spelling errors, things that you're not going to be getting when you're contacted by your bank or your credit card company.
Well, I think one of the things too, a solid, fast rule is if you get an email from the IRS, it's not from the IRS, correct?
Yeah, and that's one of the things people are always saying. How do I know when I get a call from the IRS whether it's legitimate or not? And you may be looking at your caller ID and it may say IRS, because there's a very simple technique called spoofing. Anybody can do it, where you can make the caller ID appear to be whatever you want. However, the easy way to know if it's the IRS is the IRS is not going to call you. The IRS is not going to email you. The IRS is not going to text message you. And they're not looking for you to send them iTunes gift cards.
Yeah, exactly right. Steve J.J. Weisman, the scam man, of course, has written many books about identity theft and scams that can help you protect you from these problems we're talking about. You can go to scamicide.com. We're going into tax season, Steve, real quick. You want to give us a quick one before we let you out here today, because we're going to have you back often. But talk about a tax scam that's coming at us here.
Yeah, right now, we've got a new tax law. So people are being contacted, like we say, with emails, with phones, with text messages, asking to confirm information to the IRS. The IRS isn't going to be doing this. They're not chasing you down. You don't give personal information to anyone who contacts you. You have to contact them to know if it's legit.
And of course, I don't know if I've shared this with this audience or not, but I have had twice now identity theft on my income tax return, once in 2011 and again in 2014. And they've given me a PIN number now that I've got to use every year. Is that pretty rampant? Because it's almost not a matter of if, but a matter of when it's going to happen to most of us, right?
Yeah, the IRS has gotten a little bit better at it, but it's still pretty bad. And actually, there's a bill before Congress to make those PINs available to everyone, not just people who have already been victimized. So, when you're sending in your returns, protect that Social Security number. Don't use public Wi-Fi, but you got to really get them in early before the income tax identity thief does.
Steve, thank you so much. Once again, Steve J.J. Weisman, one of his great books, by the way, is 50 Ways to Protect Your Identity in a Digital Age. And I'll see if I can get a few copies of those, and maybe next week we can give some of those away. But Steve J.J. Weisman, scamicide.com, and you can check him out. Of course, everything about him, all of his books, his videos, his speaking engagements. But boy, I'll tell you, what a great resource that is for us. And I can tell you, with respect to my own identity theft, every year I've got to give a PIN number to the IRS before we file our taxes. And every year they call me to go through line by line to make sure it was actually me that used the PIN number. So I think the IRS is doing a pretty good job. Speaking of doing a great job, Challenged Athletes Foundation and one of its founders, Bob Babbitt, is going to be joining me in just a second. What a great story. We'll talk to him on News Radio 600 Kogo. But here, first here's news and traffic. San Diego Business Saturday. Hey, News Radio 600 Kogo. Happy Saturday to you, and it's a beautiful one. It's been a while. San Diego Business Saturday is on the air. Thanks again to Steve J.J. Weisman, the scam man, scamicide.com. Also Christina Gustin, wealth advisor for UBS. And look who I have in studio with us, Bob Babbitt. Good friend. Not only good friend, but I will tell you, an icon in San Diego with respect to not only philanthropy, but business. Everyone here knows that I am passionate about Challenge Athletes Foundation, and we will definitely get to CAF in part of this interview. But also, Bob and I met when I was a taco shy of 300 pounds.
Yes, you were.
And this is, I'm going to call this in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. How big?
And I started getting in shape, and I realized that you can't live your life like, what's the Tommy Boy line, fat and stupid your whole life, or was it Animal House? But I started this thing called Club Clydesdale.
You did.
And I somehow, you and I,
how big are you?
You saw me at a race or something.
Yes.
And you came up, you said you should make some t-shirts, and you came up with the tagline for the front of the t-shirt that said, how big are you?
Yes. How big are you? It was perfect.
Do that again, it would probably sell.
It would sell huge. They do have Clydesdale National Championships now.
I forget what it was. Was it if you're over 250 pounds or 225 pounds or something like that?
Yeah, it couldn't be 200. 200 was too light, but 250 was good.
Right, so if you're 250, you don't want to be competing with a guy that's your size for the same sort of deal.
Yeah.
Talk about your beginnings here in San Diego, because everyone knows about CAF now, or at least anybody who talks to me, but also you had Competitor Magazine, which turned into Competitor Group, which turned into almost every ultra sport magazine that there was here, right here in sunny San Diego. Talk about the beginning.
Well, the beginning really was doing, when I first did Ironman in 1980, it was one of those things that there was only 108 of us. And the year before, there was 15.
That's when you used to celebrate at Diego's in Pacific Beach.
Absolutely.
Right? Which most people don't even know existed.
And Ironman now, people equate it with the big island of Hawaii. This is on Oahu. There was no aid stations, no roads were blocked off. You were on your own. You had your own crew. I had a...
Didn't you guys usch to have like backpacks and stuff on your bikes?
I did. Actually, I had a pannier sleeping bag and tent on my $75 police auction bike, which I bought, had been in a fire, and the whole back end was charred. But I had pannier sleeping bag and tent on the bike because I thought you swam 2.4, rode 56, camped out, rode back the next day, and did the marathon, which makes a hell of a lot more sense, to be honest. And when I finished that race, and it was one of those things, you're right. Oh, you'll love this, Sully. They had scales on the course throughout the race
to weigh you or your
to
stuff?
weigh you. Right. If you lost 5% of your body weight, they yank you out of the race. Right. Where they came up with the science, this is 1980.
Well, because there was no technical science really for kinesiology.
Exactly.
Right.
And of course, who knows what to eat for this thing? So I'm eating Hawaiian sweetbread and drinking Gatorade. And I come off the bike.
You're just snacking along the way.
First, I come off the bike, and my crew is like, "Hey, how about a massage?" So I laid down for a 45-minute massage between the bike and the run.
45 minutes.
Oh yeah, easily. Sure. And they had a boombox and a bit. But then they weighed you, and then I started running, and I'm waddling through Waikiki eating Hawaiian sweetbread and Gatorade, and then I get to about mile 5 and
of 26,
and they go to weigh me again, and I can hear the guy in the walkie-talkie. He's like, "Hey, can you give me that again? This guy's gained 4 pounds. You can't gain weight doing this thing."
Is that where you came up with Competitor Magazine?
No.
Was that the first one?
Yeah. Well, originally it was. So we left when I finished that race. I knew this sport was special. I knew this sport changed lives because I was totally different. Even
but there
though
was
I was
only 30 guys there.
There was 108 guys that year, but still, it had grown from 15 the year before to 108.
Oh, I see.
Right, and then Wide World of Sports covered it in 1980, and then things were growing. So I left teaching and started working for a magazine called Running News, and then it became Running and Triathlon News as this new sport was growing. I became LA editor, convinced the art teacher from the school I was at, Lois Schwartz, to leave teaching and come be the photographer because this sport was going to be huge. And then in '87. The magazine closed. Speaking of scams, a guy bought the company, Running Triathlon News, closed it, right? Collected all the money owed and disappeared.
And didn't put the advertising out or anything else like that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So anyways, myself and Lois were out of a job. And I went and met with 2 publishers who had cycling magazines, Southwest Cycling and California Bicyclist. Wow. And I said to both of them, if we did a magazine covering running, triathlon, and cycling, it could be really popular. Their exact words, both of them. Triathlon's a fad. It'll be gone in 5 years. This is 1987.
Same guy who said the mouse would be a fad.
Exactly.
Right.
And we'll never put a skinny runner on the cover of our magazine. I'm like, oh, crap. I come back, and some friends, including Larry White, who you know very well, gave us a check for $17,000 and said, start your own magazine. And we were in 200 square feet in a guy's garage under 20,000 pounds of bike racks, paying $200 a month.
And what year was this?
1987. June of '87 was the first issue of Competitor Magazine. Lois and I didn't pay ourselves for a year and a half. We had no idea that 95%.
How did you guys survive back then? There wasn't a gig economy back then, Bob.
No.
There wasn't something where you could drive Uber at night to eat. How did you guys survive?
I lived on savings. I slept on friends' floors, and it was one of those things where even though I didn't know that 95% of all magazines go out of business in the first year,
You went ahead and put your
ignorance
head
is
down
bliss. We believed in what we were doing. We believed in the storytelling. And the other thing we had overcome, everybody thought a free magazine was a penny saver. It was a piece of crap that just had coupons in it.
That's right.
And we had to change the perception. If I wanted to get national ads, we had to change that perception. And
So you had to have editorial, right?
real editorial
Yeah, right.
and real photography. And then what we had to do was, my advertising, what I sent out to the ad agencies was, listen, ABC, CBS, NBC, their business model is we're free and we create great content and we sell advertising based on the numbers of people who watch. That's my business philosophy. ESPN is they're doing subscription. It's a different business model. They're doing subscription. They're doing great content. So is one better than the other? In my mind, it wasn't.
Right.
So that's how we sort of overcame that. Next thing you know, we had Gatorade, we had Nike, we had all these national clients.
So talk about
Yes.
that though, because
Yeah.
by the way, Bob Babbitt joins us here. He's one of the founders of the Challenge Athletes Foundation. He also started Competitor Magazine here in San Diego. It's turned out to be a competitor group. But how did you convince your first advertiser? Because I understand getting a writer to come in and get some free editorial.
Right.
I understand talking Lois into come and taking photographs, and you have this idea. And the business model was obviously and still is works. But how did you get that? How'd you hook that first guy?
You know what? What really mattered was I remember calling Nike. Nike had been an advertiser with Running and Triathlon News. And I called the agency up, Wieden and Kennedy, and said, listen, I can't even show you my new magazine. It's not out
Yeah, you
yet.
had a piece of paper and a masthead, right?
But I would be honored to have you on the back cover like you've been for Running and Triathlon News. And they signed a 3-year contract, sight unseen.
Wow.
I will always be loyal because...
Did you have to give it away at all? Or did you,
No.
No.
People paid. But the other thing we did was I felt what people wanted most was they wanted to know where the events were. The events, to me, were a piece of editorial.
Right, because they didn't have the internet. You could find your local 5K,
Exactly.
10K, or triathlon every week.
So that was a piece of editorial, and we decided we'd make our prices for advertising in terms of events with like 1/3 the price of everything else.
Sure.
Because when those events are in, that's the place everybody's going. Everybody's picking it up. The other thing that was really important to me was everybody who was distributing free magazine was, if you're a cycling magazine, you're in a bike shop. If you're a running magazine, you're a running store. My philosophy was, if I'm going to a running store to pick up my magazine, how often am I going to a running store? Once every 3-4 months.
Right.
So
Good point.
Ralph Rubio's.
So Rubio's.
California's Fittest Food, California's Fittest Magazine, Jamba Juice.
By the way,
eat.
it used to be publicly traded with the stock symbol RUBO, by the way.
Yes.
Rubio's was a publicly traded company for a long time. People don't know that.
But Ralph was a good friend, and he was kind enough that we ended up in 140 Rubios. We're going through like 15,000 copies. Because think about it. The average person is thinking, okay, I'm 20 pounds overweight. I'm going to change my life. And they're not hiring a trainer.
Yeah,
they're not hiring a
walking out with
nutritionist.
a bag of fried fish,
Exactly.
fish tacos.
So the way they start, they decide, okay, I'm not going to Burger King today and have a Whopper. I'm going to go to Jamba Juice and have a smoothie. And then they get in there, and then they see this thing called Competitor.
That's right.
And then they see a thing called a 5K. And
You were at yogurt shops too. I remember at the time where everywhere that was sort of thought to be some fitness
Something
food,
related.
yogurt, smoothies, fish tacos. You weren't in the Jack in the Box.
No.
You weren't in the McDonald's.
We were in, and Rubio's had created their healthy health mex menu.
Right.
It was perfect. And our tagline on the racks was California's Fittest Food, California's Fittest Magazine. And between Jamba Juice and Rubio's, it was easy to tell people where to find us.
Sure.
We were the only publication in there, and it was good for everybody. We would put training schedules on our website and link to Rubio's and had people training to do races. It was great.
What was your highest circulation? And if I'm not mistaken, just
500,000.
Just edification. Circulation is how many magazines you print every run. You were monthly, right?
We were monthly, and we had 1 well, because we went from we did California, competitor SoCal, competitor NorCal, competitor Texas, competitor Northwest, and competitor Southeast. And then those were our 5, and eventually we had competitor Chicago, New York, and then 500,000 circulation.
How many pages was that first magazine?
Oh, first magazine was, I think, 40. Because that was the minimum.
40 pages.
Yeah, but that was the cheapest way to do it back then.
And do you remember what it cost you to print that thing back then? Way back.
You know what's so funny? Because we got the check for $17,000 to start the magazine. My first print bill was $20.
No,
I was $3,000 in the hole from the very beginning.
So $20,000 to print the magazine.
Yes.
At the very end, the $500,000. Were you even involved at that point where you knew what those printing costs were? It's just interesting to see how your OpEx went up, operating expenses went up,
it went
as well
crazy.
as the revenue went up.
Yeah.
At some point there, I know there's an exit here.
Yes.
But talk about when it went from Competitor Magazine to Competitor Group, because there was other magazines involved along the way.
Well, it wasn't just magazine. So what we did is we built Competitor to a point where we had the 5 magazines, had Competitor Radio, had my Competitor Endurance Awards, and then I'd created a series called the Muddy Buddy Ride and Run series.
Right.
And Muddy Buddy was just this silly event I'd been doing in Penasquitas Canyon, and it was really a business decision because the president of Brooks Shoes, we're trying to sell them advertising. We were belly up, trying to convince Bruce Pettit, the president of Brooks Shoes, to buy advertising. And his exact words were, guys, I can't afford to compete with Nike and Adidas and Reebok in terms of advertising. But if you had a cool event, I've got promotional dollars. So that became, okay, I've got this Muddy Buddy. I took this Ride and Tie, 2 people and cruiser bikes with this off-road, people eating Spam and throwing the bikes wherever they wanted, and made it a formalized event where it was 2 people on a mountain bike, and you had obstacles and you had mud pits, and we grew that to 7 events. And that really led to us selling the company.
So we're gonna talk about the exit here. It happened. Also talk about Challenge Athletes Foundation coming up here, because Challenge Athletes Foundation is really what your passion is here, and mine is too. And I can tell you, in the meantime, if you want to go to challengedathletes.org, you can check that out. In the meantime, though, Bob Babbitt, entrepreneur, a San Diego CEO, San Diego icon. More from him on San Diego Business Saturday on News Radio 600 Kogo. But first, here's some traffic. Hey there, News Radio 600 Kogo, San Diego Business Saturday. I'm Sully. So great to have you along today. We're talking to Bob Babbitt, one of the co-founders of Challenged Athletes Foundation, also the founder of, or the co-founder of, Competitor Magazine and Competitor Group, the Ride and Tie, the Muddy Buddy, all of which we've all gotten involved in here. Now, is Competitor Magazine still around? I don't see it. I haven't been to a Jamba Juice forever.
No. Ironman bought, Competitor was converted into a running magazine, which I thought was a huge mistake a number of years ago. And that's one of the reasons I ended up leaving in 2000. We sold in 2008 and it became the Competitor Group.
Now, was it sold to private equity?
It was.
Okay, so let me explain that to folks, because private equity is a way that business owners can exit without completely exiting oftentimes, because oftentimes a private equity group will come in and take a big position, equity position from the founders, offering an exit, usually either in cash or stock. And oftentimes they'll keep you on for a little bit on a salary to help sort of transition in.
Right.
Oftentimes the story is they don't listen to the old management and they do their own thing, right? I mean, isn't that the rub with private equity?
Absolutely. But private equity is they buy to sell, right? Exactly. And you know it's a short run. So the whole idea with Falcon Head is, and I had a mentor named Greg Rourke who had been president of Danskin Company. He said, Bob, listen, one, people are going to want to get your books to take a look at them, and they're fishing. Right?
Sure.
So,
and you're privately held, by the way, and that's one of the things about a privately held company. You're not required to pull the covers down like a publicly traded company is.
Right, exactly.
So in other words, this isn't about full disclosure to your shareholders.
Right.
This is about somebody having a perception about your business, valuing the business, which is sort of altruistic anyway.
Absolutely.
And then and you are keeping cards close to the vest here, correct?
Well, and the main thing is I knew I wouldn't keep cards close to the vest, so I asked Greg if he would help me out, and he would assess.
Something in between you.
Right. So he basically would call me every time someone would call me. I took him to Greg, and he would come back and go, "Big hat, no cattle." Right, was his exact words, right?
Sure.
Everyone. And finally, when Falcon Head approached, he said, "Big hat, big herd."
Yeah.
And these are the right guys, and we ended up doing a deal. So what they did is they bought Competitor Magazine. They bought my, Muddy Buddy, which was really the main reason I sold. I sold because we had 7 Muddy Buddies, and every time we created a new Muddy Buddy, it was going to cost us $100,000 to go into a market and create this new event.
And you had to break even as fast as you could on those things.
And we didn't have the funding. We would have had to go out and take big bank loans, put our homes up. I was in my 50s. Lois was in her 60s. That was one option. Another option was go get a partner who would probably screw us, or sell. Yeah. And we decided on sell. And sell was still the greatest move I ever made, because what Greg told me is, Bob, understand, no one buys you because they believe in you. They buy you because they believe in themselves, and they can take this to another level, and you're just an impediment that's in their way. Once you understand that and don't listen to their, we believe in you, just want to fund your vision. Once you understand you understand that it's all about you got your dollars and get the heck out of the way, and it's their ball now.
I talk to publicly traded companies as a consultant. I do a lot of keynotes as a negotiator. And I will tell you, there's one adage I have, and I'm sure, and you lived right through it. People are not in the business of buying stock; they're in the business of selling stock.
Right.
Which
true.
people don't really understand on that.
That's a great point.
Is that they really are. With respect to you, and this is one of the things, I've known you for a long, long time, and I've interviewed you probably 100 times over the years, but we've been friends. One of the things that was most notable about your journey was you didn't do this for the money. You didn't think in terms of, you had to make a living.
Right.
But this is about passion first.
Absolutely.
To you, money's always been just a number.
Yeah.
Right? Even when you exited, it was just a number. Your life didn't really change. No. You didn't let your life change, what I thought was interesting.
I still got my Dodge van.
All
my stuff in it.
Yeah, and I talk about that all the time, and which brings us to our next story, because the van, your Dodge van, maybe not that particular Dodge van, but the van is part of the Challenged Athletes Foundation story. And CAF, of course, is an unbelievable organization. I talk about CAF nonstop. We've been able to because of the Kogo listeners, because of our viewers at Big Biz Show, because of KUSI viewers. I think I'm up to almost 150,000 in raising money. Yeah. That's nothing compared to what you guys have done. And all the other guys here in San Diego, gals across the country, raising money for CAF. Talk about CAF and the genesis of that.
Well, the genesis really goes back to, you think about it, Competitor Magazine. There was a guy named Jim McLaren who was a football player at Yale in 1985. He was taking acting classes in New York, gets hit by a bus while he's on his motorcycle, thrown 90 feet in the air, dead on arrival. He lives but loses his lower left leg. And
so he was DOA, but he survived.
He was DOA. They chalked his body on the ground, and then Jimmy lost his lower left leg and reinvented himself as an endurance athlete and ran a 3:16 marathon with basically a walking leg, and then went 10:42 at the Ironman World Championship in Kona, which is where I met him.
A walking leg, by the way, is what we used to see. It was a flesh tone colored leg.
Captain Hook. Think Captain Hook, and add some paint.
And what year was this?
Well, Jimmy was first injured in 85, and then when he first came out of Ironman, 89, 90, 91
era. So
era.
this is how it used to be.
Absolutely.
You didn't see running blades.
No,
You didn't see adaptive chairs or even adaptive skiing. This was basically getting from point A to point B.
This was really prehistoric. The Earth was still cooling at this point when it came to athlete. So anyway, we met Jimmy, and Jimmy's traveling the world. He's this endurance legend. Everybody knows him. In 93, he was racing in Mission Viejo, and on his bike, a van goes through a closed intersection, hits the back of his bike, propels him headfirst into a pole. A guy who's already an amputee becomes a quadriplegic, which was the most horrific thing we'd ever heard. So myself, Jeffrey Esikow, and Rick Kozlowski, and you think about it, Koz was an event producer, Jeffrey's a financial guy, I'm a marketing guy. The three of us came together and said, let's put on an event, and the whole idea is we want to raise $25,000 to buy Jimmy a van that will give him independence. Hand control van. That was it. So we put on a little event at La Jolla Cove in 94. We raised 49, thought our job was done. 3 amputee women came to us and told us, it's great we did for Jimmy, but did you know if you get injured, your health insurance will cover a walking around leg and everyday wheelchair, but anything to do with sport is considered a luxury
Which
item.
is still the price today. If you lose a limb because you are a veteran of a foreign war or a motorcycle accident victim or even a birth defect or cancer, you lose anything, they'll give you a walking leg if you're insured.
Right.
But it's still to this day, sports are a luxury. Physical activity is a luxury.
Yeah. It's
in the mind of the insurance company.
They don't understand what it makes you a better parent. It makes you a better employee. It makes you better at everything you do. Just the endorphins that come from exercise.
Well, it's interesting because if you go to challengedathletes.org, and we'll talk about how you can get involved, but 4 out of 5 people with physical challenges who have received a CAF grant report increased activity level, more happiness, more confidence, more emotional satisfaction.
No question.
And that's been the story all along here.
Yep.
How did it go from Jim to a few female amputees to where you are now? Because what are we at our 20s?
$100 million, 25 years, 23,000 grants, 40 this last year, 40 states, 48 states, 40 countries.
You've given away $100 million.
$100 million. And now this year,
10th of a billion. I think we need to start talking.
And I think this year it'll be in over 100 sports. I think we're in 2019, 103, 105 sports. Who knew there was 105 sports out there?
What's interesting is the studio that we broadcast out of here for News Radio 600 Kogo San Diego Business Saturday. We're 2 doors down from one of the biggest prosthetic athletic
Peter Harsh. I was just in there right now. I was right before I came here. I was over at Peter's place, and he's, you've got a young model who lost both legs to toxic shock syndrome from a tampon. Lost both legs.
Wow.
And she's going to be running New York City Marathon. And
when you say running, these blades, what do these things cost? I don't think people realize what they cost.
About $15K a piece because it's totally fitted to you. You can't, and you can't just go to the store and buy a running leg. These have to be made specifically for your body.
I know our very own Bill Walton here in San Diego is one of your national spokespeople, if he's not the national spokesperson, and he has always said no challenge is too great with the right support. That's why the goal for Challenged Athletes Foundation is to support physically challenged people with the tools they need to do sports. Talk about some of the sports, because I was just last year part of the adaptive surfing,
right?
And of course the ride down the coast from San Francisco to San Diego, which Kogo listeners have walked into the studio and handed checks for. Talk about some of the sports you guys help.
So what you would just love is I'm looking at the list, and our fourth highest funded sport is beep baseball.
What's beep baseball?
Beep baseball is for visually impaired, right? So we had a woman named Kalari Gertley from Chicago, a mother of 3, right? When she was 6 years old, she had a brain bleed and ended up losing her vision. Okay. Age of 6. So one day she's fine. The next day she can't see. So she became very aggressive, beating up her friends, her relatives, kids at school.
Just a brain injury, right?
Finds beep baseball, which is baseball for the mind. And the way it works, Sully, imagine you're wearing eye shades. You're on a baseball field. There's a beep in the ball. Right, so when you're batting,
so as it's getting closer, it's getting louder?
Yes.
No kidding.
And you have a pitcher and catcher who are from your team. So I just took this sport. We went to the MLB Network and had Harold Reynolds and Carlos Pena in the eye shades playing with the New Jersey Jets beep baseball team and Kalari, who we surprised with her grant. So imagine a tackling dummy down the first baseline, a tackling dummy down the third baseline.
Sure.
You're batting with eye shades on. There's 6 people in the field, and they all have eye shades on. There's 2 people out in the field who are directing the people who are totally visual.
So they're verbally directing.
Right.
Go right, go left, go run, go
and
left.
the people who are pitching and catching underhand, right,
Right.
are people on your team. So they're saying ball as he's pitching. So you hit the ball, and you're running. And so as soon as you hit the ball, they activate the sound in either the first base dummy or the third base dummy, and you run to that. If
you're running towards the sound.
Yes. If you get there before someone picks up the ball, it's a run. If the ball gets picked up, it's an out. And they did a 5-minute feature, and Harold Reynolds was like, "This was the most amazing thing I've ever been part of." Being in the field and not knowing if a line drive is coming at your face,
sure,
and just sort of throwing your body in front of the sound of this ball,
right.
It's great. And the balls cost $35 a piece, and 6 hits, and the thing's gone. You'll love this, Sully. If you catch a ball on a fly, you're immediately in the Hall of Fame. Do not pass go.
Of course. That's how it has to work.
5 people in history.
Bob Babbitt joins us here. He's one of the founders of the Challenged Athletes Foundation. If you want to learn about this and more, and of course, every year I get involved with Challenged Athletes Foundation for the $1 Million Challenge, where we raise money right here on the air, and we try to ride our bikes from San Francisco to San Diego, about 700 miles in 7 days. You can go to challengedathlete.org. challengeathletes.org. We'll have this website up at the kogo.com keyword Sully site. Also, if you're watching us on the TV version, which can be found at kogo.com keyword Sully, you can see it there. Bob, always a pleasure, man. I swear, I could do 2 hours with you. You got 10 seconds to promote Babbittville. Talk about Babbittville real fast.
Babbittville, man. Check out all of our new YouTube interviews. Actually, we're interviewing Ben Hoffman tonight. That'll be up tomorrow.
All right, very good. Bob Babbitt, thanks so much, pal. It is San Diego Business Saturday. I'm Sully, News Radio 600 Kogo. Be sure to catch me every week. Wednesdays at 8:10 over with Ted and LaDonna here in the morning, and then on KUSI Television. Also, Big Biz Show, bigbizshow.com with myself and Russ T. Nails. Until next week, San Diego Business Saturday is on the air. News Radio 600 Kogo.